Char Chit Chat, a podcast exploring char in New Zealand and beyond. Today I am interviewing Dennis Enright, who lives in Mosgiel, which is just near Dunedin in the east coast of the South Island. I met Dennis 2 years ago. I got in contact with him through the biochar network. Basically just found the closest people I could to me, and I got in touch and we ended up making a date, and my partner and I went and had lunch with Dennis at his home, and we saw his biochar making setup, and yeah, we had quite a long, nice chat with him. And so I want to interview him and find out what he has to tell us about biochar and his history with it and why he's passionate about it. So let's make a start, Dennis, by me asking you, who is Dennis Enright?
Dennis Enright is a relatively ancient mariner, so to speak. I was born 70 odd years ago and lived on a relatively remote sheep farm for the first 13 years of my life, and subsequently life's moved on. I spent 20 years working for ag research at Invermay in the soils and fertiliser research area. After that, I kind of went out on my own doing various things, which have included biochar since maybe 2008. So that's me.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit more about what you remember when biochar first came into your awareness?
I had a friend, Mark, who just one day said he had heard about biochar, and he referred me to a lady in Dunedin that seemed to know something about it. I never managed to track her down, but it pretty much instantaneously made sense to me when I understood that it contributed to soil quality and resilience, and you had the opportunity to remove carbon dioxide.
Okay, and who was that friend, Mark? What was he involved in?
He was another relatively green character, and in fact, Mark, Reese, and myself formed a little business to make biochar or to promote biochar. We were very new to the idea, thought you needed somewhat sophisticated equipment to make it, and in fact did get to the point of having a prototype continuous feed system that lasted a very short time, given that it was made out of 44-gallon drums and sundry other things, but all in the basis of it attempting to see whether it was feasible, and it was. But of course, the expense, health and safety, all the rest of it. There were some interesting times with large fires and other sundries, but it taught me a lot. And one of the things was to stay away from the technical stuff and get onto the simple stuff.
So that business was started quite soon after you first heard about biochar? Like, are we talking about 2008 or 2009 or a bit later than that?
Oh, probably about that time. In fact, a little earlier than that. I also went to a workshop that was promoted by Paul Taylor over in Byron Bay, Australia. And Paul had a whole range of the people that were first sort of well-known names, particularly the likes of Stephen Josephs and Paul Anderson, I think it is. And all of those people ended up at Byron Bay. And I was very fortunate to be in that workshop for the 2 or 3 days. Yeah, that gave me a lot of inspiration. It helped convince me that I was on the right track. This is the thing that we should be doing. And really, it's taken up pretty much most of my spare time and work time since that time.
Okay. So is that the Paul Taylor that's really well known for composting?
It's Paul Taylor that wrote one of the first books on biochar, and he's still producing and working with Stephen Josephs on producing written information. Yeah, no, Paul was a pretty clever fellow, or was a pretty clever fellow. No, he's a very early fellow in the scheme of things. He said he would come and do workshops in New Zealand. In fact, I organised a so-called speaking tour. I picked him up in Auckland, and we drove from Auckland to Dunedin and stopped at quite a number of places to give talks on biochar. And then he ran a workshop here for those at that time, and that was way early. That would have been, I don't know, 2010, 2008.
Wow. Okay, so that Byron Bay workshop was just about biochar, was it?
Absolutely. Making biochar and why it should be so good and why it is so good.
Okay. And what do you personally use biochar? I know you had a business and you might have been trying to sell it, but do you use it for yourself and what do you use it for?
Well, I spent about 20 years growing vegetables organically and selling them at the farmers market and box systems and to people at the gate. I have a particular interest in soil. And so, yes, I've used it in my garden plots. Wasn't so much when I was commercial because that actually pretty much came before my interest in biochar. I sort of moved on from growing at that scale, and when I got involved with biochar, it became just too difficult to do both, and I feel that biochar can contribute both to organic production, to sustainable production, to food security, a material to add to your soil. In some ways, similar to other materials that are put on grow plants, but this material has benefits forever rather than being consumed or sort of depleted.
Okay. So to summarize then, you were growing vegetables commercially, but you're not using biochar. And then later on, you were just growing your own vegetables for your own consumption. And then you were using biochar. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So with your long experience of biochar, what is now your favorite method of making biochar and why?
I'm a flame cap enthusiast, and I use a bath, and I've made a DIY sort of corrugated iron box that I can put the bath in the base of and then feed it from one side to improve the way it actually burns or pyrolyzes, particularly in terms of managing the wind. And secondly, to reduce the risk of sparks and anything else that might cause fires, etc. I appreciate that there's pros and cons in flame cap production, but I'm an enthusiast, and I think it's a great way for small scale operators to produce biochar.
Okay. So let me drill down onto the finer details of your setup. So you've got a metal bath, and I'm guessing the thicker the better. And then you're talking about putting corrugated iron to make a box around the bath. How much higher does the iron go above the top of the bath?
Be something like shoulder height, head height. And I do actually have a couple of little chimneys in it to try and manage, the draft to get some efficiencies going.
Okay.
So yeah, and I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah. And it sounds like it would be quite easy actually to take it apart and move it to another part of your property or to somebody else's property. So it could be almost quite portable.
Oh, very portable because I'm sort of a recycler as well, and some of these pallets are actually made out of inch square metal, and I've used something like 4 or 5 of those, bolted them together, strapped some corrugated iron to it, and it's light enough to roll onto my little truck and throw the bath on, and I can do it wherever I choose.
Okay. Nice. And would you like to explain a little bit more detail the method when you say flame cap? I understand what that is, but our listeners probably do not. So can you explain from the go? You've got your empty bath. Tell us what's
Yes.
the first step.
Well, the way you do it is you have your empty bath, and that there are other vessels that will achieve the same end.
Mm-hmm.
You start a small fire in the base of it. As it's burning, you pick pieces of small sized branches that actually fit either the length or the width of the bath,
Mm-hmm.
and you layer it over your fire and let that give that time to be flamed up and be giving off gas. When wood is heated, what happens is that at first it sets off gas, and then of course with the heat that gas burns, and that will continue to burn just gas until it largely gets to a certain point where it's not going to give off any further gas. And at that point, it then starts burning the blackened stick. Well, that blackened stick is actually turned to charcoal. At that point, it probably is largely all charcoal, and the fire would consume that charcoal if you didn't actually put on more sticks or put the fire out. So the aim in terms of making biochar is to put on your layer of sticks, you heat it up, part of it goes off in gas and keeps on burning, and then as that happens, the stick gets black, and then when the gas stops coming off, the stick starts to char. At that point, you put more wood on and you just repeat the process. And with a little bit of experience, you can have that going very nicely over the whole area of the bath. And you just keep doing that until the bath is largely filled. And then you have to put the fire out, either with water or by smothering it.
Mm-hmm. And which method do you use the most? Do you use the water the most, or do you put some kind of lid on the top?
Mostly I use water, I have to say, and that smothers the fire or puts the fire out quite quickly. I tip the whole bath full out on the ground, spread it out a little bit, add a little bit more water, and ensure that it's completely out. And the water then also helps to not only put the fire out, but it also keeps down dust and is quite an addition to managing the safety aspects of making biochar.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's a good description. I think somebody could almost go away now and find a bathtub and start doing it. So thank you for that. All right. So can you explain to us with reference to the soil, because you're a soil person and a soil scientist, why are you hooked by biochar? Like, what does it actually do in the soil that you like so much?
For me, a key word is that it gives resilience to soils that are being cultivated or manipulated to produce food. If you dig or turn over soil, invariably that stimulates the microbes and bugs in the soil, and they have a little bit of extra oxygen or other stimulants. But when they are stimulated, they then go on and consume the carbon that was part of your soil. And the carbon is crucial in a whole range of reasons, particularly for sort of retaining the friability of your soil so that water and air can permeate into your soil. And if you are turning your soil over regularly, quite rapidly end up with less and less carbon, and you'll find that your soil gets clumpier and more clumpy. It sort of packs harder, closer, and then of course it becomes much harder to work, much harder for the plants to put their roots in, much less oxygen and water will penetrate the soil. So you put some biochar in to these sort of soils, and it's not just biochar. You need best to have other carbon in the form of, say, composts or organic materials. But by putting these things in, I'll make the point that putting both biochar and compost in, biochar lasts forever effectively. The other organic material is the material that the microbes will chew up and eat and produce all of those lovely materials that go to gluing the particles together, keeping spaces, making air passages, etc. It's very complex, but it's very simple. You need carbon. You need carbon that's resilient and stays for a very long time. The bugs can live in it. It's there. They can eat the likes of composty type carbon materials that are growing there and dying and returning to the soil, etc. And you have a much better chance, a much more resilient soil going forward that can tolerate some of the things that we do when we're trying to produce food.
Thanks for that. So again, I'm going to summarize back to you to see if I've understood what you've said, and I think this helps reinforce it to the listeners as well. So what you're saying is that when you dig soil over to plant a crop, you're releasing carbon from that soil, and it basically goes up into the atmosphere. And by adding compost and biochar together, you're replacing some of that lost carbon with the compost, which is food for the microbes. And then what is it exactly that the char is then doing? It's making the soil still be friable. That's correct, right? Is that the main job that it's doing? It's stopping it from like compacting back down? Or is it doing other things in addition to that?
Can I just take one wee step back? The way we lose carbon is that when the microbes are consuming organic matter, they actually respire CO2. So they chew up sort of some carbonaceous material, and that then comes out like we're breathing out CO2. So they're consuming it and they grow and multiply, and you go from millions to zillions to whatever of bugs, and that's magic because they're also producing materials. Their poos and whatever else are residues that can be used by plants. They glue bits of soil together, like bits of mineral soil, so that they don't pack in the same way. So those are the sort of things they promote, the microbial activity and the microbes themselves, because biochar is it's very, very porous. It's like a coral reef where these guys can find shelter, and even when you're sort of digging them up, they're so small, they're sitting in these porous spaces in the charcoal, and so aren't subjected to the same detrimental sunshine or other activity that's going on that will kill them off, etc. It's a pretty major and really interesting sort of life down there in the soil, and the biochar may not have a lot of nutrients, usually doesn't, but it has this ability to hold the water in these pores, hold the microbes in these pores, and it has other sites for holding the nutrients that plants might subsequently get to use to grow with.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fungal activity happening down there as well in the soil. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the benefits that large-scale agriculture would gain from using biochar? So say large-scale pasture-fed animals or large-scale grain crop growth. What would they gain if they were using biochar in the soil?
Well, there's usually if you're thinking of pastoral soils, one of the best options as a feed supplement, it can be quite health-giving to animals that may have been eating sort of monocrops and things and having upset stomachs at times. It's been found that animals will sometimes either self-feed or it can be included in some of their supplementary feeds. And you can improve their health, improve their productivity, their rate of growth, etc., which makes it a very viable economically, as well as probably from an animal health point of view. If you're talking pasture, one of the best ways that can be to get biochar into your pasture soils is to put it through an animal, get that benefit. Pasture soils themselves often are pretty good for organic matter and etc. So it's not that the biochar won't be beneficial, but it might not be as strikingly beneficial as, say, some of the horticultural soils. the horticultural soils, you've got to, economically, there's some issues around the price of biochar and the rates that are going on, etc. But the benefit of biochar is if you can put a light rate on every year for 10 years and get it to a certain point, and then one assumes, I haven't seen it yet, but one assumes you can stop putting it on because you've reached a certain critical process where you've improved the soils. They need nutrients. Biochar is not breaking down as other organic matter is doing. It's accumulating in that soil, and so the benefits are, they might be quite small with one application. 5 or 6 applications might make quite a considerable difference over 5 or 6 years. So it has to be and is demonstrated as being very useful when you're arable situations. And it's a matter of getting a good, economically viable process in place to ensure that you're going to get the best value out of your applications.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think when farmers consider the cost of fertilizer and the known benefit of biochar holding on to that fertilizer, so if farmers have applied biochar to that land and then apply fertilizer, it's been shown that that biochar will hold on to that fertilizer rather than it leaching through the soil profile. And so therefore, their fertilizer application rates can go down, and that should then help subsidize the cost of putting the biochar on in the first place. I mean, that's how I see it.
That's a great summary of one of its potential benefits or its benefits. Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. What is needed in New Zealand to make biochar a household topic?
A good question. I think that we need to, and it's not just my opinion, I've had other people voice this opinion, we virtually need to talk to anybody and everybody, because anybody and everybody could themselves be making a little bit of biochar, or they might use it in their businesses at scale. And so one of the things that the farming community may be skeptical of are all the benefits that we talk about in terms of soil structure, drainage, water holding, etc., really happening and giving value for putting that material on. And to date, there has been no long-term farm-scale research done that will answer that question. And I think it's absolutely imperative that it be done. And it's somewhat disturbing that it hasn't been done to date. It's critical because the accumulated effects, such as I've just mentioned, but not only that, the soil is demonstrably more friable, and that actually reduces the amount of diesel required to drag implements through the soil to replant it, etc. There's a whole range of things. And I'm aware of a farmer in Pukekohe who grows potatoes and onions, and he has stated on television that his soil is definitely, in many cases, more friable, reduce the amount of energy required to do the work on that, as well as getting the productivity, a productivity increase. And not just an increase, but it's also been commented on by customers of his that the flavours of some of his produce are definitely improved. There are people in the country now applying it at scale and getting benefits at scale. That I think the government, the agricultural community, etc., needs to get alongside these characters, support them, get the information that they're gathering on our behalf, and get that to other growers.
Yeah, I agree.
And one more thing, I got a connection with the Good Carbon Farm, and that's a small not-for-profit business that's encouraging and promoting biochar at grassroots levels, and we're working together to connect with enviro schools, talk to the school children. We've conducted one little so-called workshop with the children. That resulted in one of the parents going home and making some biochar, and now I've had a request from the farmer husband, or who, in terms of talking about how to manage some willow tree removals. Can we make biochar? What can we do with it, etc., etc. So it's everybody. It's children right through, and in all walks of life. You never know who you're going to touch.
Yeah, for sure. Are you doing any other interesting projects with char at the moment besides the Good Carbon Farm?
Not really, although I've had a wee request to the local council person who handles volunteers that are working in the Greenbelt and other places. They want to have we talk about biochar. I have a few people that I make biochar for from time to time using my bath system. And I've in the past, I've spent time in Thailand, I've spent time in Australia, and I've spent a lot of time around New Zealand. I've taken a bit of a spell over the last year or so in terms of being involved in sort of more group activities, but I'm actually feeling a little more rejuvenated. I certainly haven't lost my commitment to doing or promoting biochar, so that's food for thought going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you were involved with the Biochar Network of New Zealand, weren't you?
Yes, I was I was the founding chair. Trevor Richards and myself got that running, and and we were sort of part of the early Australian ANZBIG group as well, and NNZ have connections now, which is just brilliant. Don Coyne over in Oz, he's a real ball of energy. It's been good. I've met so many wonderful people, and they've been working hard, both on account of they're just committed to it for either climate or for agricultural reasons, and they just see the value. And somehow or other, we've got to bring that to governments and other funders and supporters to ensure that we get that across the mark. It can contribute can contribute hugely to drawdown of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, would you like to talk to that point a little bit more? I mean, some people will say, well, but you're making a fire and you're burning, aren't you releasing a lot of CO2?
And we are, but it's we're also collecting it. You take a tree or a piece of wood, and normally that tree would either be burnt and it all go back to the atmosphere, and you would just say that's net neutral. It came out of the atmosphere, it went back to the atmosphere. But in fact, if we get in there and we can take some biochar out, we can do 25, maybe 30, if we're lucky, % of that carbon that would have gone back up into the atmosphere will actually end up in biochar. And even if we keep it in our back pocket, it will never go back into the atmosphere in a timeline that's going to affect, it's going to be a reduction in the CO2 in the atmosphere for up to hundreds, if not thousands of years. So ideally, you don't put it in your back pocket, especially if you've got white trousers, you put it in the soil. That's where it belongs.
Yeah. Okay, so 20 to 25% of anything that we're burning potentially becomes biochar that we can then sequester away in the soil or in any other kind of use that doesn't let it burn again.
Yeah, I think that's a very conservative estimate. I think if we're careful, we can do better, slightly better than those numbers, but that's absolutely the case. Yeah. And as lots of people are aware, it was being done thousands of years ago by people in the Amazon basin and lots of other indigenous peoples around the world. And we, of course, thought we could do better. We burn down a jungle now and turn it to dust. They would make a space in the jungle and add biochar and continue to feed their population. I'm not quite sure who's learned anything over the years.
Yeah, they were doing something that actually was sustainable, and we've done the opposite and made most of what we do completely unsustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can put this back into it as one of the methods. There's other methods managing. This is just one of the tools in the toolkit, but it's a very important one.
Yeah, and the thing I love about it and why I'm so passionate about it is because of all the cascading benefits. So when we put it in the soil, it doesn't just sequester the carbon out of the atmosphere. It does a whole lot of other things that are beneficial anyhow. And then they
Yes,
grow better food, grow lots of trees or whatever you're growing. It makes that process better. So yeah, that's what I love about it.
totally. Yep. You haven't. We haven't. I'm an agricultural person, but we haven't talked about how it can manage some of the other. Carbon can go into making cement better or slightly improved. It can go into bitumen roads. It
Hmm.
can go into building blocks. It can be turned into graphite for batteries or whatever the hell else they use them.
Yeah. All right, Dennis. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat to me. It's great to catch up again, and it's great to hear your viewpoint of biochar and why it gets you excited. And thanks for sharing all that knowledge. And yeah, keep it up. And I
Oh, I do.
hope to see you back at Biochar New Zealand soon.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for the opportunity. It came as a surprise, but I do appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. We'll keep in
Pleasure.
touch, eh?
Yep.
All right. You keep well. Bye for now.
Cheers. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.